Good afternoon, everybody. I'm JP Tasker from CBC News, and I'll be today's moderator. We have Ministers Lametti, Mendocino, LeBlanc, and Bennett, and MPs Anand Sangri and Sarai here to make an announcement about bail reform. So I'll hand it over to you, Ministers, whoever wants to go first. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, JP. Bonjour. Hello. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We have a larger than usual team with you today, so I'll start by introducing my colleagues. To my immediate right, Minister of Intergovernmental Relations, Dominic LeBlanc. To my immediate left, the Minister of Public Safety, Marco Mendocino. One further to the left, the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions and Associate Minister of Health, Carolyn Bennett. Next to my right, my extremely talented Parliamentary Secretary, Gary Ananda Sangri. And finally, to my far right, Chair of the Justice Committee, MP Randy Sarai.
If we are so numerous here today, it's for a good reason. We all have a role to play so that Canadians will feel safe throughout the country. And we are aware that too many Canadians do not feel safe.
We're just coming out of a pandemic after 3 years of anxiety and isolation. And at the same time, I know, and I think all of us know, that there is a feeling that crime has worked its way into places we all thought were safe. On the subway going to work, or walking down the street during the day, or grabbing a coffee. For the
courageous members of police services, going to work seems more dangerous than it used to be. This is a heavy weight that they have to bear. Them and their families both. Canada is a safe country, and I think that we are all aware that we are fortunate to live here. The number of crimes is lower today than 20 years ago, but that doesn't mean that we can't do better.
You expect us to tackle crime, and you expect us to tackle the causes of crime. You want our laws to be effective in maintaining public safety while staying true to the values enshrined in the Charter of Rights. You want us to work with all levels of government to ensure that your communities are safe and our justice system is working the way it should. That makes perfect sense. Administration of justice is a shared responsibility with the provinces and territories. Nous avons été clairs avec vous.
We've been clear. Our government would do its share on the way the justice system treats violent reoffenders. This means reforming the Act. This explains why we are so numerous here today. I'm going to begin with legal reform. Early this morning, I tabled Bill C-48. C-48 brings specific changes to sections on bail under the Criminal Code that targets violent reoffenders. We also want to put an end to violent crime and to improve the justice system for intimate partner violence victims.
This bill responds directly to concerns raised by the premiers as well as police, mayors, and victims advocates. It flows from the work that we have been doing together with the provinces and territories for several months now, highlighted by our most recent meeting in March, where I committed to bring legislation forward to reform the bail system. We also had the benefit of work that was done by the Justice Committee, and both Chair Sarai and Parliamentary Secretary Ananda Sangri were part of that. The work has been refreshingly nonpartisan, with officials and politicians focused on solutions to improve public safety. That's exactly what you would expect of us. So what's in C-48? This legislation amends the Criminal Code to do several things. First, it creates a new reverse onus targeting repeat violent offenders involving weapons. Weapons including firearms, including knives, and including bear spray. Second, it adds specific firearms offences to an existing reverse onus provision, and these are often offences linked to organized crime. Third, it strengthens the existing reverse onus regime addressing intimate partner violence, which we first introduced in former Bill C-75. And finally, it requires courts to consider an accused person's history of convictions for violence, as well as community safety and security concerns when making a bail decision. Crucially, these proposed reforms signal that repeat violent offenders who pose a risk to community safety should not be released while awaiting trial. The goal of Bill C-48 is improving public safety. At the same time, we want to make sure that these law reforms do not make things worse for Indigenous people, Black people, and other vulnerable groups who we know are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. This was recognized in the communiqué following our FPT meeting in March, and I know this is a priority that my provincial and territorial counterparts share. I want to re-emphasize the important role that the provinces and territories have played here. Several provinces have already taken steps to address the bail system within their jurisdictions. Ontario has invested $112 million to help ensure that repeat violent offenders comply with their bail conditions. Manitoba has increased support for its criminal organization high-risk offender unit, including funds for a full-time psychologist, additional probation officers, and community corrections workers. Saskatchewan has released an updated provincial bail policy that provincial Crown prosecutors must follow in cases involving high-risk offences and intimate partner violence, as well as cases involving children and vulnerable adults. And British Columbia, a leader in this regard, has the provincial government introducing a revised bail policy that directs Crown prosecutors to seek detention in cases involving repeat violent offenders. This is exactly how our federation is supposed to work. Each order of government doing its part, working together to ensure that you are safe in your communities. Le crime est un enjeu incroyablement complexe.
Crime is a complex issue. These reforms are only part of the efforts made to improve our justice system, to have an efficient system responding to the needs of Canadians. We understand that the best way to protect our communities is to prevent crime. This means to deal with the underlying causes of crime. We have to understand why someone commits a crime and find ways to make this person change their trajectory.
Investments that make our justice system better equipped to get people the help they need to leave the criminal justice system and never need to come back. We've seen success with drug treatment courts, community justice centres, and the Indigenous Justice Program, and more. We'll hear more from my colleagues about critical investments in crime prevention and anti-gun and gang prevention. And we're working to ensure that people get access to the mental health and addiction supports that they need. Strong laws, crime prevention, supports for vulnerable people. These are the three pillars of good criminal justice policy. Together, they help make our communities safer. C-48 is one part of that commitment to your safety. It delivers on the promise I made to my provincial and territorial counterparts to reform our bail laws. It's informed by what we heard from premiers, from ministers, from mayors, from police, and from Parliament. It's important to see this bill make its way through Parliament quickly. I firmly hope this bill will receive unanimous consent. Canadians expect us to act, and I trust my friends in the House and Senate view things in exactly the same way. Thank you. Merci. I would now invite Minister Mendicino to say a few words.
Merci, David. Thank you as well for the Indigenous land acknowledgement, and welcome to all of our colleagues. Today's announcement is about keeping our communities safe. The bail reform legislation we've just tabled in the House of Commons zeroes in on repeat violent offenders who use guns and other weapons. With this proposed law, the onus will now be on them to justify to a court why they shouldn't remain in custody as they wait for a trial. In preparing this legislation, as you've heard Minister Lametti explain, we engaged with provincial, territorial, and municipal partners, as well as police leaders and community advocates. And within our own government, we have worked very closely with our colleagues right across the benches, including, and I'd like to single out Minister Bennett, who does extraordinary work in advancing our mental health strategy, and that cuts right to the core of the way in which we can stop crime and loss and tragedy before it occurs. And I look forward to ongoing collaboration with you, Carolyn. Bill C-48 reflects the broad consensus that we heard. We must strengthen our bail system to keep communities safer. For workers riding a bus or a subway, for parents who send their kids to school, for families who are going for a walk in their own neighborhood. This legislation is about them and indeed all Canadians so that we can keep them safe. And it will help to separate those offenders from the community to achieve that goal. Bill C-48 is one part of our comprehensive strategy to tackle gun crime and keep Canadians safe. Our plan is based on three priorities: strong laws, strong borders, and strong prevention. On strong laws, in addition to today's bail reform legislation, we are taking major steps forward through Bill C-21. 3 years ago, this government banned assault-style firearms like the AR-15, which were designed for a battlefield and have no place in our communities. We're now taking steps to strengthen that national ban, as recommended by the Mass Casualty Commission out of Nova Scotia. And just about a year ago, we banned the sale, purchase, and transfer of handguns, which have become the #1 type of gun used in homicides. These are two key elements of Bill C-21, Canada's most significant gun control legislation in a generation. The legislation will also raise maximum sentences against gun traffickers and introduce red and yellow flag laws to address the relationship between domestic abuse and gun violence, which disproportionately impacts women and young girls. As we speak, Bill C-21 is being debated in the House, and we're making good progress with the support of the NDP and the Bloc Québécois. On strong borders and enforcement, we've invested almost $500 million into the Canada Border Services Agency in the last 2 years alone. We've also deepened our cooperation with the United States to fight gun smuggling and trafficking. And just last week, we announced nearly $400 million federal dollars to give police the additional resources they need in the fight against gun and gang violence. And I would be remiss if I did not again extend our condolences to OPP Officer Mueller, the latest member of the policing community to be killed in the line of duty. Finally, our plan also includes strong prevention strategies. And this is headlined by the $250 million Building Safer Communities Fund, which helps young people make good choices and to stop gun crime before it starts. And our plan is beginning to work. StatsCan reports that gun crime is trending downwards, including in Toronto, which marked a 22% decrease between the years 2020 and 2021. But we can't stop there. L'annonce d'aujourd'hui est l'un des éléments du plan global de notre gouvernement pour assurer la sécurité des Canadiens. Cela commence par des frontières solides et un soutien à la police avec des ressources supplémentaires, une coopération renforcée avec les États-Unis pour lutter contre le contrebande et pas plus tard que la semaine dernière, comme je l'ai déjà mentionné, l'annonce de près de 400 millions de dollars pour lutter contre la violence. Ensuite, il s'agit de la loi forte comme les réformes d'aujourd'hui, l'interdiction des armes d'assaut, le gel national des armes de pointe et le projet de loi C-21, l'action la plus importante du Canada en matière de contrôle des armes à feu depuis une génération.
guns in more than a generation. This involves solid prevention strategies to stop gun crimes.
And that is exactly what we will continue to do, is to advance a plan that focuses on strong laws, strong borders, and strong prevention. When it comes to keeping Canadians safe, you can't pick and choose one of these priorities. You have to advance all three. And by advancing this legislation today around bail reform and in companionship with the other steps that we are taking through Bill C-21, the investments we are making to support law enforcement in our communities and our borders, and perhaps most importantly, to continue to advance strategies which go right to the root causes of gun crime, we can stop tragedy and loss which is caused by violent offences and other gun crimes before they even start. And with that, I will now turn it back over to our moderator for the next speaker. Merci.
Thank you, ministers. Yeah, so we'll do one question, one follow-up. We'll start with reporters in the room. If you want to ask a question, just
I believe Minister LeBlanc has remarks.
Oh, I'm sorry.
JP, you were about to miss the best part of this news conference.
How could I cut you off?
Unbelievable. Your colleagues, the look of dread on their faces when you were about to miss the choses extraordinaires que je vais ajouter brièvement.
Extraordinary things that I'm going to add. Briefly, as my colleagues have said,
we have been working extremely closely with our provincial and territorial counterparts to develop this legislation. This morning, for example, I had an opportunity to speak with Premier Ford to acknowledge the important work that he did and his ministers did, and other provinces and territories as well, of course, in contributing to this important legislation. It responds directly to the concerns that provinces have raised with respect to their ability to hold violent repeat offenders to account. Through these amendments to the Criminal Code of Canada, we're creating additional safeguards which will make it harder for individuals with extensive criminal histories, particularly when it comes to violence with weapons and intimate partner violence, to be released while they await trial. Grâce à ces modifications législatives,
because of these legislative changes, the victims of violent crimes and all Canadians will be safer. This is a balanced approach, respecting fundamental rights as laid out in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, all the while being dissuasive and solid. This, in addition to restrictions on firearms that have been implemented over the past few years, also with prevention programs as described by my colleagues that we fund throughout the country in order to strike at the very heart of criminality. During this time, Conservatives are offering no concrete solutions with regards to public safety.
Have no real plan to tackle violent crime. They're happy to mouth empty slogans and tout failed policies. Canadians need real solutions, and this legislation tabled today is a key part of our government's plan to keep Canadians safe. Ce projet de loi va rendre nos communautés,
this bill will make our communities
plus sécuritaires. Nous espérons qu'il bénéficierait, comme le ministre Lametti a bien dit, de l'appui de tous les partis à la Chambre des communes.
At the House of Commons will support this
makes its way through Parliament. We'll continue to listen to our territorial and provincial partners, to law enforcement agencies, community groups, on what more we can all continue to do together to keep Canadians safe. Et maintenant, JP, avec ces mots tellement importants.
And now, JP, I think that we can go to the questions.
Okay, so as I was saying, one question, one follow-up, just lock eyes with me, and I will write your name down, and we'll get to all of you, hopefully, in the room. And then if we do have time left, we will go to Zoom. So the folks who are on the meeting there, just raise your hand, use the raise hand function, and we'll try and get to you. Tom Perry, CBC News, go ahead.
Hi, Minister Lametti. Can I ask you, why did you cut it off at violent crime with a weapon? We heard from Pierre Poilievre who's saying that really any violent repeat offenders should be denied bail outright. So why did you think that a weapon was sort of a valid cutoff point?
Well, first of all, we as a piece of legislation, we responded to what the Premier's asked for, which was reverse onus in Section 95 and increased investments in things like guns and gangs. And we went further by adding another reverse onus, the one you've referred to, with respect to violent repeat offenders. We've added the community consideration. And in there, we have also directed judges or justices of the peace to look at an offender's violent record as a matter of course. So even though it's not in the reverse onus provision, it is in the general directives that we've added to this piece of legislation. So we've included violent offenders generally. What we are doing, Tom, is signaling to courts, we're signaling to Crown prosecutors that a person should not be out on bail if they have a history of violence. And so that's precisely what we're doing. We think we have chosen a way that is charter compliant, and it certainly goes beyond what the Premier has asked us to do in their letter to the Prime Minister.
I actually had a question on a different topic for Minister Mendicino. I'm just wondering if there's any update in terms of, have you got any update on why information about foreign interference didn't make it to Cabinet, and if there's any update on how many members of Parliament you've informed or spoken to about potential foreign interference?
I'll come to that in just a second. I'll come to that in just a second, but I just want to add very quickly to what David said, that Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives often come at Canadians with catchy slogans. What we've done today is add to a concrete plan to reduce gun crime and violence. And, it is one thing to talk tough against criminals, but what we've done is, in addition to tabling this legislation, last week we introduced $390 million more for law enforcement. This comes in the wake of what has been a very difficult period for the policing family. I've been to every single one of the funerals of fallen police officers in the line of duty, which shows that in a very tangible and concrete way, we're doing what we need to keep our community safe and also to support law enforcement. So I think it's just important to make sure that the record is clear about that. Secondly, as you've heard us say repeatedly, that any form of foreign interference is unacceptable, I beg your pardon. And I want to be clear that when it comes to parliamentarians, we take that issue extremely seriously, which is why when Mr. Chong's issue came to light, we reached out to him, we provided him with a briefing, and we'll continue to support him and all parliamentarians so that they can represent their communities in a way that is free and clear from foreign interference. And finally, I would just say that you heard the Prime Minister say, and I will be supporting him in this regard, as will Minister LeBlanc in his capacity of Minister of Democratic Institutions, that if there are any instances where foreign interference in parliamentarians are surfacing, that we need to be informed directly. That is the Minister of Public Safety in my capacity, as well as the Prime Minister.
Number of MPs? Have you contacted other MPs? Can you say who they are, how many you've contacted?
Look, we get that question often from the press. I'm not in a position to talk about individual cases because of the Security of Information Act. It's important that we safeguard their safety and safeguard the individuals that work within the security and intelligence community. And that's not to say that there aren't public documents that explain the work that CSIS is doing. For example, the annual report, which they tabled just a couple of weeks ago, which shows very clearly that we are engaging federal parliamentarians to ensure that we are providing them with support around foreign interference. This is an issue that is evolving. It's complex. It's not easy. And that's why we need to work very closely with our colleagues in the House of Commons, regardless of partisanship, to be sure that we can protect them from foreign interference so that they can represent their constituencies.
Okay. Taria Isri from Global News, please.
This is for Minister Lametti. Are today's reforms an admission of sorts that we did have a catch and release problem, as the Conservatives have criticized your government for having when it came to violent offenders?
Not at all. We are strengthening the bail regime that is there, but we hadn't weakened it prior to. We strengthened the bail regime with Bill C-75 by adding a reverse onus for intimate partner violence, which we further strengthened, by the way, in this piece of legislation. What we're doing is sending a clear signal with other reverse onuses, as well as a general message, as well as, and this is important, an obligation to consider the community. We had a very high-profile case in the north, in the Vuntut-Gwich'in First Nation, in which the community didn't want somebody on bail to come back because they were afraid. So we're asking justices and JPs to take the community into account in their decision-making. So we're sending out a strong message, but Canada has a fundamentally strong bail system, and it is a charter right. You are innocent until proven guilty. This is a critically important part of our legal system. But what we're doing for certain violent offenses is changing the default position and making sure that it is only in cases where there isn't a threat to public security that they will get bail.
And criminal defense lawyers have said keeping people in jails will just increase the likelihood that they'll reoffend. So why are you confident that these reforms will actually increase public safety?
Well, these are targeted reforms. I think there's a valid point that is being made by criminal defense lawyers. 70% of people in federal prisons are awaiting trial. That's the majority. They are technically innocent at that point. Legally innocent at that point. They may be found to be legally guilty later. And so we need to strike a balance. We think we've done that here, working in the range between the charter right to bail and public security and public safety. We think we've threaded that needle. And we've done it with the help of the provinces and territories by working together.
Okay, Valérie Michaela Bain, Radio-Canada.
Monsieur Lametti, dites-moi, je vais jouer l'avocat du diable, étant donné qu'on n'a pas les données sur le nombre de gens qui ont réussi à obtenir une libération conditionnelle alors qu'ils avaient commis un crime violent et qu'on ne sait pas combien de personnes ça pourrait toucher si le projet de loi devient loi. Comment êtes-vous certain, quelle assurance est-ce que vous avez que ça va fonctionner, que ce sera efficace et pourquoi vous en tenir à 5 ans et pas le dossier criminel dans l'ensemble de quelqu'un qui a commis des crimes violents?
Record of a violent offender. To answer your question, as I was saying, we need to strike a balance. And so we put a 5-year period to not go too far back into the past. We don't want to block up the system with determinations of bail. Overall, we do have a balance here, and it's true that we have to work on the data. We have a commitment from the provinces to provide and share data, and Statistics Canada has begun their work on this. And so I hope that we will have better data in the near future. This is extremely important. And with the commitment of all provinces and territories, I believe that we'll get there. But perhaps the true answer to your question is cooperation. The cooperation that we have between the provinces, territories, and the federal government ourselves. And the police services, we are all moving in the same direction, and by working together, we can deal with an issue that is as complicated as bail. It's the only way to act, and I believe that we are on the correct way forward.
Peut-être pour Mme Bennett, je ne sais pas si vous répondez en anglais ou en français.
You can answer in English or French.
On a parlé de prévention. De quelle façon est-ce que vous allez vous assurer ou tenter de vous assurer que ces crimes violents-là ne se répètent pas?
These violent crimes are not repeated. Thank you for the question. As my colleague said, prevention is essential. It's essential to have the best mental health services in place for all Canadians. With complex mental health issues, ever since 2017, we've invested $5 billion in the 6 priorities of provinces and territories with regards to complex mental health issues. And now, we have a pilot project in place with regards to housing, social services, and mental health services.
pour enlever
in order to
les 20 personnes avec tous les relations avec les policiers et aussi dans les salles d'urgence. C'est très important d'avoir les logements supportifs,
housing supports,
oui, d'avoir pour protéger leurs médicaments, pour
people's mental health, so they can keep their medication and continue taking their medication. It's very important for us. When we look at what's happening in Kelowna, in Penticton, mayors have all sent out the same message. It's the same 20 people in their communities that need help. And they need support
pour les personnes avec les maladies
for people
mentales
with
sérieuses.
Serious mental health
Si je peux
problems.
ajouter quelque chose
If I
très
can add
rapidement.
something very quickly,
Dans mon portefeuille,
in my
il y a
portfolio,
l'initiative
we
fédérale
have a
de
federal
la
initiative
création de
for the
comités plus
creation
sécuritaires, the Building Safer Communities
the
Fund.
Building Safer
C'est un fonds
Communities
de
Fund.
250
This
millions de
is a
dollars.
$250
On a
million
accéléré
fund.
l'implémentation
We've
de ce
fast-tracked the
programme,
implementation of
y
this
inclure
program,
au Québec,
and including in
où le
Quebec,
dernier
where
été, j'avais annoncé
the last
environ 40
announcement
millions de
was
dollars
$40 million
avec mon collègue,
with my
l'honorable
colleague,
Pablo
the
Rodriguez.
Honorable
Donc, en
Pablo
collaboration
Rodriguez.
avec les
So in
provinces
collaboration
et
with the provinces,
aussi les
we
municipalités,
are working, and also in
on peut
collaboration
renforcer
with
la capacité
municipalities,
des
we're
organismes
trying to
locaux
strengthen
pour
the
offrir tous
ability
des services santé
of
mentale,
community
comme
organizations to
Caroline a
provide mental
expliqué.
health services, as
Mais
Caroline was explaining.
au-delà de mon
But
portefeuille, il y
also,
a une approche de prévention
there's a
avec une
prevention
stratégie
approach that's
nationale pour le
happening with the
logement.
national
Il
strategy
y a une
for housing.
stratégie nationale
There's a national
pour la santé
strategy
mentale.
for
Et
mental health.
ça, c'est la façon
And
qu'on peut
this is how
avancer
we
un
can
des trois piliers que j'avais mentionné,
advance one of the
des
three
lois
pillars
fortes,
that I
des
spoke to:
frontières
strong
fortes, et oui, une
laws,
stratégie
strong
de prévention
borders,
qui
and a
sont,
strategy for
qui
prevention
est vraiment forte.
that is also very strong.
Okay, Jordan Gowling, CTV.
Hi, it's for Minister Lametti. You deny that Bill C-75 went too far in its efforts to streamline the bail system, but these reforms you're announcing today are a direct result of criticisms by police associations, municipalities, and provinces. So how do you square that today? Was Bill C-75 just perfect legislation?
Bill C-75 was an important step forward in criminal law reform in Canada, of which bail was just a small part. It was the product of extensive negotiations with the provinces and input from the provinces in the period running up to that. Bill 75, in terms of bail, strengthened the bail regime by adding a reverse onus with respect to intimate partner violence, but it didn't change the fundamentals of Canadian bail law. The fundamentals were already there in a series of Supreme Court decisions that remained the same before and after C-75. So it didn't really do that. It did render more flexible non-serious, non-violent offences, and asked judges not to create a revolving door with respect to administration of justice offences, which aren't violent. So with respect to violent crime, Bill C-75 strengthened the bail regime and was consistent with Supreme Court decisions. What we're doing here is we're now going a little bit further.
And just as a result of these reforms today, are you anticipating any capacity issues in jails now that we'll be holding more violent offenders? And have you had any conversations with your provincial counterparts on that front?
We haven't with respect to capacity, although it was something that we discussed with respect to finding the right balance today. It certainly was a discussion that we had at our federal provincial territorial meeting in terms of not going too far with what we were doing. We'll continue to monitor. This is a complex problem, complex challenge. The only way we will get through it is by working together. Remember, the provinces have the administration of justice as part of their responsibilities. We set rules in the criminal code and certain other statutes. So we'll need to work together with them and see if there are pressure points on the system as we move forward. I can add that we have added a 5-year review in this piece of legislation precisely to do that.
Okay, Fraser Needham from APTN, please.
Thanks. This is for Minister Lametti. Do you anticipate the changes that you've announced today will affect in any way how glad you factors are applied at bail hearings?
It should not, in the sense that Gladue factors are applied at bail hearings, but it does not change the fundamental premise of bail, which is you have a right to bail unless you are a threat to flee, unless you're a threat to public safety, or if the administration if the confidence of the justice system will be brought into question. So those always have been the predominant factors. The Gladue factors then ask you to take that into account with respect to the individual. That's still going to be the case here. So we're going to work within the framework, and the Gladue factors will still apply.
Okay, as a follow-up for both Minister Lametti and Minister Mendicino, we've heard a lot of stats thrown around about increase in violent crime. I think leader of the opposition was just out saying it's increased 32%. I don't know what the time frame was, and that this is largely due to violent offenders out on bail. Do your stats bail that out, or in what you've been able to come is that really a problem that violent crime is on the increase across the country, and that it is due to repeat offenders out on bail?
I frankly don't know where the leader of the opposition gets his statistics, so I won't comment on them. What I will say is that violent crime has gone down over the past 20 years. We do know that from Statistics Canada, and Stats Canada has also told us that, as Minister Mendicino pointed out in his prepared remarks, that gun crime is going down. What we do know is that there have been a number of high-profile incidents, and that there's a feeling of insecurity out there, and we are addressing that by sending a clear message about bail and about the principles surrounding bail.
Yeah, I would just add to that again, contrary to the rhetorical spin that you get out of Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives, when you actually look at their record, it did great harm to public safety. Many of their laws around sentencing were struck down by the Supreme Court of Canada. They presided over a number of years. The last time they held the reins of government, the Conservative government did, they made dramatic cuts, which had a devastating impact to police budgets. And they continue to stigmatize people who are vulnerable. I mean, Minister Bennett has rightfully called out Mr. Poilievre when he has, with a broad stroke, marginalized individuals who need a public health approach when it comes to prevention. Conversely, our government has put forward laws which are informed by a broad consensus, including Bill C-48 today. We did that work in conjunction with provincial and territorial governments, regardless of partisan stripe. And we are putting in place additional resources to support policing in our communities. And finally, we have rolled out an innovative Building Safer Communities Fund, which looks at the social determinants that can lead to crime in our communities, including making sure that individuals who are vulnerable because they have a mental health issue or maybe struggling with substance, that they get the treatment that they need. And what this bail reform legislation does is it gets that entire exercise right by focusing on repeat violent offenders who need to be detained in custody pending their trial, while at the same time respecting the Charter. And that is the North Star of this government when it comes to passing legislation and keeping our communities safe.
Mylène Crête, La Presse, please.
Bonjour, my question is for Mr. Lametti. We know that people who fit the criteria here for the river's onus, most of the time, the judges don't give them bail anyway. So why are you reforming this system? This might have very little impact. It's what the judges are already doing. Obviously, we have the changes that we're making. We're changing the burden, which is a different process, this reverse onus provision. So the changes that we're bringing are very important ones. We also, Mylène, have to think about the signal that we're sending out to justices to the Crown prosecutors and to lawyers throughout the country and to society in general. That is, that we want these questions to be dealt with each time a judge makes a decision on bail. So it is also a way of framing the analysis. This is very important. And we wish to send out a very clear message with this, a clear message to society. And so you mentioned several provinces that were on board, that had invested money to make sure that people do respect their bail conditions. Do you think that Quebec is doing enough on this front? We're going to work with Quebec. Minister Bernardel participated in the meeting that was held in March. He was part of the unanimous consent that we find here in the press release that we published afterwards. We're prepared to work with Quebec. We are prepared to work with any province or territory in order to monitor the system. As I was saying in English, criminal law and the criminal system cannot be reduced to a slogan. This is what the Conservatives do. They do it all the time. It's a slogan for them. But for us, it's a challenge. It's a complex challenge. We have to work with experts, with provinces, territories, with police services, with victims, with all those involved in the system. It's not a slogan. It's not a catchphrase. And this is the work that we're doing. And we're doing this work in good faith. I know that you're prepared to work with Quebec, but do you think that Quebec is doing enough? That was my question. Obviously, I'm not going to comment on measures that already exist. It's up to Quebec to determine how they can do their share of this work, and I'm prepared, we're all prepared as a government to work hand in hand with Quebec so they can succeed.
David Fraser, the Canadian Press.
Hi there. Officials this morning were unable to tell us how many people these targeted reforms would impact. So I'm wondering, what level of confidence do you have that these changes won't disproportionately affect groups of people who are already overrepresented in our prisons? Thank you.
That's a good question, David. I've already commented about statistics and getting better statistics, and we do have, I had said this in French, but we do have the engagement on the part of the provinces to accumulate and share their statistics, and we know that Statistics Canada is also doing that as well. So we do hope to have a better statistical picture moving forward. We hope that we have threaded the needle with respect to not going too far in terms of either clogging up the bail system or having a disproportionate impact on groups that are already overrepresented in the criminal justice system generally. We've tried to do that by remaining targeted and focused, so focusing on violent crime with weapons and other specific infractions, as well as intimate partner violence. So we're hoping that by keeping it in that box, we won't have a disproportionate impact. We will obviously monitor this. All the provincial and territorial ministers of justice and public safety ministers agreed that we don't want to exacerbate over-incarceration of Indigenous people, of Black people, other marginalized Canadians in the criminal justice system, and we will be vigilant.
The other thing I'm wondering about is there's an election in Alberta. I'm wondering, how was this communicated to the Alberta government? Because I know the justice minister there was one of the more active and vocal people when you met a few months ago.
And indeed, he took the podium with us at the final press conference when we announced that joint communique. So then, I guess they're in an election, so he's not technically I guess he is still technically Minister Shandro at the time was supportive. We have worked before that time, since the month of October. We have been working with the provinces. It was first raised at a federal, provincial, territorial meeting by British Columbia government, an NDP government. We have worked since that time at a technical level with all governments across Canada of every political stripe. After the March meeting, we also continued to work with the provinces going back and forth and territories with respect to the kinds of things that we were proposing. So we've had a good deal of interaction on this, including Alberta, and we hope that this will find favor not only with the provinces and territories, but as I said, with every single political party in the House of Commons.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, for today. These folks have to get back to the House. Thank you, ministers, MPs, for joining us for this press conference. Thank you all for your questions. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, JP.